the group remains steadfast, with many members already struggling as the company nets record profits.
I am stunned at just how well media is reporting on this strike. So I'm going to get there and give you my thoughts as well as some clips as examples. But first, let's talk about the strike that is happening within the Greater Toronto area. This is during a time of record profits for Canadian grocery stores. Roughly 3,700 Metro grocery store workers are now on strike. That's across 27 stores within the Greater Toronto area, and they're asking for higher wages and full-time hours. Which, just quickly here, on the full-time hours part, you may have had discussions in your life, and I know I have, of interacting with people that claim that people just don't want to work anymore. Not the case. People do want to work. They just don't want to be exploited anymore. Which goes to this point that they're not only asking for higher wages, but more hours. People want to work. People want to be able to survive and live. The issue is they're not getting the pay that they actually deserve. But let's get to some details here. So this is from the Globe and Mail, as they write, the strike by members represented by Unifor Local 414 comes amid concern among workers that their wages haven't increased much over the years, while big grocers have seen large profits. The Competition Bureau said in June, a June report, that the country's largest grocers, Loblaw, Loblaw's Sobeys, Metro, reported more than $100 billion in sales in 2022 and earned more than $3.6 billion in profits. Lena Payne, Unifor's national president, said in an interview on Sunday that any agreement reached with Metro's striking employees will set a very important pattern for the grocery sector, while where other union locals will be negotiating. Workers at Metro rejected a tentative deal, the union said on Friday. Quote, they know they're not just fighting for themselves, they're fighting for every grocery store worker and every retail worker out there. So I think this is a very important point here, and this will be potentially the impact coming out of this. As we've already seen, the impact of many strikes all across North America, the effect it's having on other workplaces. So I'm going to get some of those examples as it pertains to Canada in a bit here. But I want to show you this report. This is from Amar Khan, a journalist for Global News. And this is a fantastic piece. Just fantastic. I am very, this is the world I come from. I come from local news. I used to work at CTV. So this is, part of what I do here is media criticism. I think it's important to understand how the media frames issues, how that can persuade you to think a certain way, even if there isn't that clear intention behind it. This is an example of actually showcasing a fight from the perspective of the working class, which is often rarely done, or I should say not often, rarely done when it comes to these sorts of reports. So here is Amar Khan's piece for Global News.
We want a livable wage. Toronto is an extremely expensive city. So many of our members, unfortunately, have to use food banks. We have several that live in community housing.
As the sun beats down on unionized striking Metro workers, the group remains steadfast, with many members already struggling as the company nets record profits. Some Metro employees say they can't afford to shop at their own store and talk about trying to find deals at cheaper grocery outlets.
We have to do flyer hopping, see who has what on sale, and instead of going for one grocery shopping a week, we're going for 3 or 4 because we have to go to multiple locations.
You want to pick up some groceries at your own grocery store, but with the skyrocketed prices, you can't even afford to do that.
Vitek has been working at Metro for 5 years, but to make ends meet, she works a second job.
There is no social life. I just go to work and I come home and I try to race to my other job.
Okay.
Residents in Liberty Village who are being affected by the strike say they're backing workers' rights.
They got to do what they got to do, so I'm totally okay with that, and I can just rearrange my day.
Before the strike, the bargaining committee voted to accept a deal from Metro, but members voted it down. When Metro officials were asked if the contract included a living wage, they said yes.
I believe it did.
The union, though, says that's not true. According to a recent report from the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, the average one-bedroom Toronto wage to live is over $33 an hour. And according to the union, full-time workers at Metro average just over $22 an hour, while part-time employees, which make up the majority of Metro workers, make just a shade over the $15.75 minimum wage.
So fantastic piece here from Amar Khan of Global News, showcasing just how expensive it is to live in Toronto and how what these workers are asking for is just an ability to have a living wage. And because they have the ability, because they are unionized, they can strike. They're striking as they should. And this whole piece is fantastic because it really gives you the perspective of the working class, which often historically has been missing in a lot of these sorts of reports. But here, I think this has been a long enough, a sustained push of unionization, of striking, of a clear situation where these massive companies are making record profits while their employees are making very little. This has been going on long enough where it's impossible for these sorts of networks to ignore it. They have to acknowledge that. And you have reporters like this who oftentimes themselves are, they are working class as well. These people don't make, I remember when I was younger, watching like local news pieces or even like national news pieces, thinking that, oh, this person's on TV, they must be millionaires. No, I worked in local news. People aren't making a whole lot of money. I was making around $17 an hour editing national news. So it's not, these on-air individuals are also working class. Important to keep that in mind. So it's good to have that perspective brought into these pieces around a strike like this. Now I want to show you another clip, and I'm going to get to more around media because I want to show you a clip from after this clip, a clip from a different news outlet and how they reported on a different strike and just how wild that is. But first here, this is from a CBC News report that was done by Clara Pazika. And here's part of her interview with some of the striking workers outside and what they're asking for.
This worker attended college for baking, but can't get full-time work.
I just want to work like full-time, like over 40 hours to be survive. But still, the wage is not fair enough here.
She makes less than $17 an hour compared to the average full-time worker making more than $22 an hour.
When the pandemic came, we were all heroes. Everybody, thanked us. It was wonderful. The company appreciated us. And it went right down to zeros very quickly when they took that $2 pandemic pay away from us.
There was a time in this industry where people came here, right, and worked here and were able to buy homes, put their kids through school, university. We can't do any of that stuff anymore.
So the pandemic pay, I think, is an important piece of this as well, because these workers got an increase in their pay during the height of the pandemic. It is very clear now, and you could argue it was very clear back then, that this was all a PR move. Because once the height of the pandemic, lessened, they took that pay away. They cut the pay of their employees. And because COVID wasn't much of a news story anymore, there wasn't a whole lot of attention around that. I don't know how you as a company, what do you expect is going to happen when you cut the pay for all your employees after increasing it? What do you think is going to happen? It is so good to see these workers strike. And there are other stores that don't have unionized workforces that really need to consider organizing. And I think this strike is going to lead to that sort of, at least it's going to help to foster an environment where organizing and further strikes in whether it's grocery stores, whether it's just retail, it's more likely to happen when you have this environment that's being created by a strike like this. Now, I want to get to the media piece here a little bit before I wrap it back around, because I was amazed by both these news pieces, actually. But I was initially going to, oftentimes when I look at a story that I want to cover, I think about how I want to cover it, what I want people to get out of it. And a local union story like this, a local strike like this, is simply going to get less attention just generally. So I wanted to give everybody watching it something to get out of it. So I was going to, look at each of these pieces, each of these reports covering it, and do a little, media criticism, see how it was framed in this way versus how it was framed here. Yet every single piece I watched covering this strike, they all covered it fantastically. It was all just brilliant. Amar Khan, again, Global News, fantastic work. Claire Pazika, CBC News. Rhianne Campbell, City News. And Andrew Brennan, CP24. All fantastic reports. And I'm sure there are more out there. Those are the ones that I watched. But they all did a fantastic job, as well as, I should give a shout out here as well to Breakfast Television in Toronto. This is Sid, Melissa, Frank, and Eva. They had a discussion about this, and it was well informed. Sid is very in support of the striking workers, as the rest of them are as well. But really good to see that. Now, I want to get to a different kind of clip because, oh man, I watched another report from this is a different strike, though I'm sure this network that I'm going to get to is going to cover this one as well. We will see. But before I get there, it has to do with this particular strike. So as CTV News reports, here they write, it comes as unionized workers, this recent strike in Metro comes as unionized workers at British Columbia's ports rejected a tentative agreement late Friday night, and as Manitoba Liquor Mart employees stayed off the job Saturday in their continued strike action. And I'm going to get to more strikes that are going on in Canada as well, or that went on in the past. But this one in particular, so the British Columbia ports, this was covered by BNN Bloomberg. So you already kind of know what you're going to get going into it. This is a business network, but the way that they just kick off, like I'm not going to show you, I'm going to show you like 20 seconds or maybe 10 seconds here, because the way they kick off this report tells you everything you need to know about how they frame this strike.
And let's stick with the BC port strike and bring in the CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, Perrin Beatty. Perrin, I understand that you are hoping that the federal government gets involved here and helps to get these workers back on the job.
All right. Those 15 seconds are all I have to show you. Look at how this whole discussion around this strike is framed. Let's bring on the CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. I wonder where he sits on this issue. Talk to him, only talk to him for 6 whole minutes. And let's frame it as, when do you want the federal government to step in and stop these workers from organizing? When do you want the federal government to strip away a worker's ability to strike? What? Like, it's so... This is the extreme version of what you normally see. This is... To be fair, this is not what you normally see in a local news report around a strike. It's not this clear cut, but this is an example of just how bad it can get. And if you go on to each piece here, like this is fallout from the strike, so I'm sure they're all blaming the workers the entire time. When the government should step in is a big portion here. And impact on the Canadian economy, again, going to blame the workers striking for the impact as opposed to their bosses not giving them what they deserve. Again, going on to supply chain disruption. So everything that these employees are doing, their fault for disrupting the economy as opposed to those at the top that are not giving them the compensation that they deserve. But that's how things typically go. So I was very surprised by how this strike at Metro has been covered. Pleasantly surprised. Now, a few more around other strikes that have happened recently. So last month, about 1,800 striking Halifax area education support workers returned to work after ratifying the latest contract. More than 155,000 unionized federal public servants went on strike earlier this year, and I covered that, including 35,000 Canada Revenue Agency employees. And last year, thousands of education support workers in Ontario also went on strike. So this has been, of course, a lot of the strikes in the U.S. have gotten a lot of attention because of just the number of individuals involved there when you're talking about a country as big as America. But Canada has had also its fair share of strikes. Last thing, this is just an analysis of what is going on here. So Larry Savage, a labor studies professor at Brock University in St. Catharines, Ontario, told CTV National News that workers have a heightened sense of their own worth coming out of the pandemic. Quote, I think there's a lot of anger and resentment as a result of the pandemic and the high cost of living. Grocery store workers, for example, literally put their lives on the line for their employers and for society more generally during the pandemic, and a lot of them can't even afford to pay their rent or their utility bills. So I think there's a sense out there that workers are fed up and they're demanding more, and they're using the right to strike to do that. 100%. I mean, clearly that's the case. Since the pandemic, I think we've seen a lot more labor action, and people are just more aware now of what they are worth and how they do not want to be exploited.